He stayed silent when he found out she betrayed him. But what he did next made her cry on her knees. If you believe in fair payback, subscribe. The room erupted in laughter the moment Allison's words sliced through the chatter. James would be lost without me. He's hopeless with money, she declared, her voice dripping with smug amusement as she raised her wine glass. In the cozy dining room of her parents' Seattle home, surrounded by the glow of candlelight and the aroma of roasted turkey, her family roared. Her mother, Clara, dabbed tears of mirth from her eyes, her sister Lillian smirked knowingly, and even Uncle Roy, usually a man of few words, let out a rare chuckle. To them, James Holt, Allison's quiet 38-year-old husband, was the punchline of a well-worn joke, a man tethered to his wife's whims, too timid to challenge her. But James sat still, his hands wrapped around a glass of sparkling cider, his face a calm mask. He didn't flinch as Allison leaned closer, her breath warm with wine, and whispered, "You're lucky I keep you in line, darling." The table laughed again, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath his steady gaze. They didn't know, couldn't know, that James had been weaving a plan for 6 months, a plan that would unravel Allison's perfect world in just 7 days. The annual gathering at the Moore family home was a tradition steeped in excess. Too much food, too much wine, too many voices clamoring for attention. The dining room, with its polished oak table and twinkling chandelier, buzzed with energy. Clara recounted her latest charity gala, Lillian boasted about her new promotion, and Allison, as always, held court. Her stories sparkled with tales of luxury, weekend getaways to Napa, a new designer coat she just had to have. Each anecdote landed with a glance at James, as if daring him to object. But he didn't. He smiled, nodded, played the part of the doting husband. To the Moores, James was predictable, pliable. A brilliant engineer who'd built a comfortable life, he seemed content to let Allison steer their finances. "She's got a knack for it," he'd say with a shrug when Clara teased him about his bank account. They saw a man who'd rather tinker with blueprints than argue over budgets. What they didn't see was the ledger in his mind, tallying every dollar Allison spent, every lie she spun. For years, Allison had treated their marriage like a game she'd already won. She'd swipe his cards for lavish purchases, a $4,000 handbag here, a girl's trip there, always with a breezy excuse. "It's an investment, James," she'd say, or, "You work so hard, we deserve this." He'd let her believe he was oblivious, too buried in his projects to notice the accounts dwindling. But James noticed everything. 6 months ago, something shifted. A late-night email from their bank flagged an unfamiliar transaction, a hefty transfer to an account he didn't recognize. Allison brushed it off as a mix-up, her smile as polished as ever. But James dug deeper. He found patterns, withdrawals she couldn't explain, expenses labeled miscellaneous, that funded her endless indulgences. Worse, he discovered she'd been using his name to open new lines of credit, racking up debts he'd never agreed to. At first he was stunned. The woman he'd married, who'd once charmed him with her ambition and wit, had become a stranger who saw him as a bottomless wallet. But shock gave way to resolve. James didn't confront her. Instead, he started planning. He hired a financial advisor to quietly secure his assets, moving his savings and investments to accounts Allison couldn't touch. He tracked her every move, saving receipts, emails, anything that could prove her deception. He let her think she was untouchable, all while building a fortress around his future. That night at the Moore house, as Allison basked in her family's laughter, James sipped his cider and let the moment pass. The fire crackled behind him, casting shadows on the walls, and the scent of cinnamon pie hung in the air. To everyone else it was just another holiday dinner. To James, it was the opening act of a reckoning. Allison leaned in again, her voice low and teasing. "Face it, darling, you're stuck with me." Her eyes gleamed with the certainty of someone who thought she'd won. James met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "If you say so," he replied softly. She had no idea what was coming. For 6 months, James had played the fool, letting Allison dig her own grave. Every extravagant purchase, every careless lie had deepened the hole. In 7 days, her cards would fail, her accounts would dry up, and her carefully curated life would crumble. James wasn't out for revenge, he wanted justice, the kind that came with truth and consequences. As the evening wound down, Clara raised a toast to family, and glasses clinked in unison. James lifted his smile as steady as ever. Let them laugh, he thought. Let them enjoy their illusions. In 1 week, Allison would face a reality she couldn't charm her way out of, and James would finally be free. He excused himself to step outside, the cool Seattle air a sharp contrast to the stuffy dining room. The city lights twinkled in the distance, and for a moment he allowed himself to imagine what came next. A life unburdened by deceit, where his hard work belonged to him alone. The thought was quiet but powerful, like the first rays of dawn after a long night. Back inside, Allison was still holding court, oblivious to the countdown ticking in James's mind. She thought she controlled him, their marriage, their future. She was wrong. And soon everyone would know it. James Holt sat at his desk in the quiet of his Seattle home office, the glow of his laptop casting shadows across the room. It was late, the kind of hour when the city outside seemed to hold its breath. Allison was asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware that her husband was unraveling the tangled threads of her lies. For 6 months, James had been piecing together a puzzle he wished he'd never found, a puzzle that revealed his wife's betrayal in stark, undeniable numbers. It started with a single email, a bank alert about a transfer he hadn't authorized. Allison had waved it off with a laugh when he asked, her eyes bright with that practiced charm. "Oh, just a glitch, darling," she'd said, already turning back to her phone. But James wasn't one to let things slide. An engineer by trade, he thrived on precision, on finding the why behind the what. So he dug. And what he found changed everything. Allison hadn't just been spending his money, she'd been siphoning it, weaving a web of deceit so intricate it might have gone unnoticed forever if not for that one slip. Thousands of dollars had vanished into miscellaneous expenses. Spa retreats, designer clothes, weekend trips with friends who never seemed to chip in. At first, James thought it was carelessness, a lack of restraint. But then he found the accounts, hidden ones tied to his name but not his knowledge. She'd been using his identity to secure credit, piling up debts he'd never agreed to, all while smiling to his face. The betrayal stung, sharp and cold. James remembered the early days of their marriage, when Allison's ambition had felt like a spark that lit up their world. They'd dreamed together, trips they'd take, a house by the water, a life built on trust. But somewhere along the way her dreams had turned to greed. The woman who once planned a future with him now saw him as a means to an end, a walking bank account to fund her illusions of grandeur. He could have confronted her then, demanded answers in a blaze of anger. But James was patient, methodical. A confrontation would only give Allison a chance to twist the truth, to play the victim. Instead he chose silence. He hired a financial advisor, a sharp woman named Rachel who specialized in untangling messes like this. Together they traced every transaction, every dollar Allison thought she'd hidden. Rachel's reports were meticulous. Receipts for a $3,500 necklace Allison claimed was a gift, bank statements showing transfers to accounts labeled consulting fees, that led nowhere. It was a trail of carelessness, built on the assumption that James was too busy, or too blind, to notice. "He's not stupid," Rachel had said during one of their meetings, her voice low over coffee at a downtown cafe. "But she thinks you are. That's her mistake." James nodded, his jaw tight. Let her keep making it. 4 months, he played the part Allison expected. The distracted husband, too buried in his engineering projects to question her. When she came home with a new coat, a steel darling, he smiled and said it looked nice. When she booked another emergency getaway with her friends, he nodded and asked if she needed anything for the trip. Each time, he added another piece to his case, another nail in the coffin of her deception. But it wasn't just about the money. Allison's betrayal ran deeper, cutting into the trust that had once held them together. Every lie, every purchase, was a reminder that she didn't see him as a partner, only a resource. And yet, James didn't hate her. Hate would have been too easy, too loud. What he felt was colder, clearer, a determination to reclaim his life, to hold her accountable not with shouts, but with consequences. Rachel helped him secure his assets, moving his savings and investments into accounts Allison couldn't touch. They set up alerts to flag any new activity in his name, ensuring she couldn't pull another stunt. James even consulted a lawyer, a quiet man named Paul who specialized in financial disputes. Paul reviewed the evidence and gave a slow nod. "She's been reckless," he said. "If you play this right, she won't have a leg to stand on." The plan was simple but ironclad. Let Allison think she was in control until the moment she wasn't. James would wait until the family dinner at her parents' house, that stage where she loved to shine. He'd let her bask in her smug certainty, let her family laugh at his expense. And then exactly 1 week later he'd pull the rug out from under her. Every account she relied on would dry up. Every card she swiped would fail. And when she turned to him for answers, she'd find only the truth she'd tried to bury. That night in his office, James closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. The house was silent, save for the faint hum of the city beyond the window. He thought of the dinner just days away, of Allison's inevitable performance. She'd stand there, glass in hand, tossing barbs about his hopelessness, while her family chuckled. She'd think she had him exactly where she wanted him. She was wrong. James stood and crossed to the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline. The Space Needle glowed faintly in the distance, a reminder of the city he'd called home for years, a city he'd soon leave behind. He didn't know where he'd go next, not exactly. Maybe Portland with its quiet rivers and open skies. Maybe somewhere farther, where the air felt cleaner, untainted by the weight of this marriage. But wherever it was, it would be his choice, his life. For now he had one task, to see this through. Allison had spent years treating him like a pawn in her game, but games could be flipped. In 7 days she'd learn what it felt like to lose. Not because James wanted her to suffer, but because truth had a way of catching up. And when it did, he'd be ready to walk away, leaving her to face the consequences of her own making. He turned from the window, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The countdown had begun. The Seattle sky was a heavy gray, rain tapping softly against the windows of Allison Moore's favorite upscale grocery store. She stood at the checkout, a basket of artisanal cheeses and imported wine balanced on her arm, her manicured nails tapping impatiently as the cashier swiped her card. "Declined," the cashier said, her voice apologetic but firm. Allison's smile froze. "Try it again," she snapped, thrusting the card back. A second swipe, then a third, still nothing. Whispers rippled from the line behind her and Allison's cheeks burned. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to her. Back home, she tore through her purse, dialing the bank with trembling hands. "There must be a mistake," she insisted, her voice climbing as the operator's calm reply cut deeper than any insult. "You're no longer authorized on these accounts, Ms. Moore." The words landed like a slap. She tried another card, then another, each call yielding the same result. Zero balance, access revoked. Her pulse raced as she scrolled through her phone, texting James. "What's going on? Call me now." No reply. She called, once, twice, 3 times, each ring unanswered, swallowed by the void of his silence. Allison stormed into their sleek downtown condo, expecting to find James at his desk, ready to fix her mess with that quiet patience she'd always counted on. But the apartment was eerily still. His laptop was gone. His favorite jacket, the one she teased him about, wasn't on its hook. On the kitchen counter, a single envelope waited, his neat handwriting spelling her name. Inside were divorce papers, crisp and final, alongside a note. "I trusted you, Allison. You chose this." Her breath caught, the room tilting as the truth sank in. James wasn't just gone, he'd planned this. For years, Allison had thrived on control. She'd built a life of envy-inducing moments. Brunches with friends who hung on her every word, vacations photographed for likes, a wardrobe that screamed success. James's steady income as an engineer had been her canvas, his trust her paint. She'd told herself it was harmless, a new dress here, a spa weekend there. When expenses piled up, she'd found ways to cover them, using his name for loans she swore she'd repay. It wasn't stealing, she reasoned, it was theirs, wasn't it? But deep down she knew better. Every secret transaction was a gamble, one she'd bet James would never call her on. Now, standing in their empty condo, she saw the cost of that gamble. Her phone buzzed, her mother, Clara, demanding to know why Allison had canceled their lunch. "I didn't," Allison stammered, but Clara huffed, unconvinced. Lillian texted next, her words sharp. "What's this about your cards not working? Fix it." Even her friends, usually quick with compliments, were silent. Panic clawed at her chest. This wasn't just about money, it was her identity, her power, slipping through her fingers like sand. She drove to the hotel where James's credit card had last been used, her mind racing. He couldn't do this to her. Not after everything. The lobby was quiet, the clerk tight-lipped until she demanded answers. "He checked in last night," the man said, eyeing her warily. Allison took the elevator to the 5th floor, her heels clicking with purpose. She pounded on his door, her voice a raw edge of desperation. "James, open this door. You can't just leave me like this." The door swung open, and there he was, calm, unshaken, his eyes steady in a way that made her falter. "What did you do?" she hissed, stepping inside. The room was sparse, just a suitcase and a coffee cup on the table. James leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I protected myself, Allison. That's all." Her laugh was brittle, disbelieving. "Protected yourself? You froze my accounts. I couldn't even buy groceries." She waved her phone as if the declined transactions could sway him. James didn't flinch. "Those weren't your accounts," he said evenly. "They were mine. And you've been using them like they were yours alone." Allison's throat tightened. She'd always known how to handle him. Tears, a smile, a soft apology. But now, his gaze held no warmth, no trace of the man who'd once looked at her like she was his world. "You're overreacting," she tried, her voice softening. "We can fix this, darling. It was a misunderstanding." James shook his head, pulling a folder from his bag. He slid it across the table and her stomach dropped. Inside were bank statements, transaction logs, emails, proof of every secret she'd buried. "No misunderstanding," he said. "You used my name, took on debts I never agreed to. I gave you years to be honest. You chose lies." Her hands shook as she flipped through the pages. There it was, in black and white. The loans, the hidden accounts, the life she'd built on borrowed time. She wanted to scream, to tear the papers apart, but his calm was a wall she couldn't break. "You can't do this," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm your wife." "Not for long," James said, nodding to the divorce papers she'd left behind. He stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "You thought I'd never notice, Allison? You thought I'd let you bleed me dry. But I'm done." She stumbled back, clutching the folder like it could anchor her. For the first time, Allison saw herself through his eyes, not a queen holding court, but a gambler who'd bet too big and lost. She opened her mouth to argue, to beg, but no words came. James opened the door, his expression final. "Go home, Allison. Figure out what's next. But it won't be with me." She left, the hotel hallway blurring through tears she refused to let fall. Back in her car, she gripped the wheel, her mind scrambling for a plan. She'd call her lawyer, her friends, anyone who could help. James thought he'd won, but she wasn't finished. Not yet. Across town, James sat in his hotel room, the city's lights flickering beyond the window. He felt no triumph, only relief, a quiet certainty that he'd done what was right. Allison's world was unraveling, but not because he'd pushed her. She'd built it on lies, and lies always collapsed. In 4 days, the next phase of his plan would unfold, and Allison would face the truth she tried to outrun. But for now, he let the silence settle, a promise of the freedom waiting just beyond the horizon. Allison Moore sat in her Seattle condo, the silence oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the city outside. The divorce papers still lay on the counter, untouched since she'd returned from the hotel 2 days ago, their stark white edges a taunt she couldn't ignore. Her phone, once alive with notifications, was quiet now. No calls from her mother, Clara, no texts from her sister, Lillian, not even a reply from the friends she'd spent years impressing. The world she'd built, polished to perfection with brunches and borrowed glamour, was slipping away. But Allison wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. She'd spent the morning pacing, her mind a whirlwind of plans and excuses. James thought he'd cornered her, thought he could strip her of everything and walk away clean. He was wrong. She'd always been the one to twist a bad hand into a winning one, charm, tears, whatever it took. There had to be a way out, a loophole to turn this back on him. She dialed her lawyer, a sharp woman named Vanessa she'd hired for a contract dispute years ago. "He can't just cut me off," Allison said, her voice tight. "We're married. I have rights." Vanessa's response was measured, cautious. "Send me the papers, Allison. And any financial records you have. If he's locked you out, we need to see what's joint and what's not." Allison emailed everything she could find, bank statements, credit card bills, even a photo of James's note. She left out the hidden accounts, the loans she'd taken in his name. Those were her mistakes, yes, but she'd meant to fix them. Didn't that count for something? While she waited, Allison called Clara, hoping for an ally. "Mom, he's trying to ruin me," she said, her voice cracking for effect. But Clara's tone was cold. "You told us you had everything under control, Allison. If you've been reckless, that's on you." Lillian was worse, her text blunt. "Don't drag us into your mess." The rejection stung, sharper than Allison expected. Her family had always been her audience, cheering her every move. Now they saw her as a liability. Desperate, she scrolled through her contacts, landing on an old friend, Tessa, who'd always envied her lifestyle. "I need your help," Allison pleaded, spinning a tale of James's cruelty. Tessa listened, but her reply was guarded. "I heard something about your accounts, Allison. People are talking. Maybe you should sort this out quietly." The call ended and Allison hurled her phone onto the couch. Quietly? That wasn't her style. She'd fight, loud and fierce, until James regretted crossing her. By afternoon, Vanessa called back, her voice grim. "Allison, this isn't good. Your name's on debts, big ones, that James claims he didn't authorize. And there's a prenup. Did you know about it?" Allison froze, her mind racing back to their wedding planning, a blur of dresses and champagne. She vaguely recalled signing something, laughing it off as a formality. "It's ironclad," Vanessa continued. "No claim to his assets unless you can prove coercion, which you can't. Worse, his lawyer sent evidence to the banks. They're investigating you for unauthorized transactions." The word investigating hit like a brick. Allison sank onto a chair, her breath shallow. She'd meant to pay those loans back eventually. It wasn't fraud, not really, just a shortcut to keep up appearances. But the banks wouldn't see it that way, not with James feeding them proof. "What happens next?" she asked, her voice small. Vanessa sighed. "If they find intent, you could face legal action. Fines, maybe more. You need to come clean, Allison. Now." Come clean? The thought was laughable. She'd spent years crafting an image, successful, untouchable, the woman who had it all. Admitting she'd bent the rules would shatter that. But as Vanessa's words echoed, Allison saw the walls closing in. She wasn't just losing James or money, she was losing herself. For a moment, she wondered if she could call him, apologize, beg for a truce. But the memory of his face in the hotel, cold and resolute, stopped her. He'd never bend. She spent the evening digging through old emails, searching for anything to leverage, a forgotten promise, a shared account she could claim. But every trail led back to her own choices. The spa trips she'd booked on his dime, the emergencies she'd invented to justify withdrawals. By midnight, exhaustion won. She curled up on the couch, the condo's sleek decor mocking her. This was supposed to be her castle, not her cage. Across town, James sat in his hotel room, reviewing a message from his lawyer, Paul. "The banks are cooperating," it read. "Her accounts are flagged and they're tracing the loans. She'll have to answer for it." James set his phone down, the weight of the moment settling over him. He'd expected to feel triumph, maybe even joy, but there was only a quiet clarity. This wasn't about destroying Allison, it was about breaking free from her lies. Paul had warned him she might fight back, try to spin a story of victimhood. "She'll call it unfair," Paul said. "But the evidence is airtight. Stay calm and let the process work." James trusted it would. He'd spent months preparing, ensuring every step was legal, every move deliberate. Rachel, his financial advisor, had triple-checked his new accounts, safe from Allison's reach. The life he'd built with her was gone, but he was building a new one, piece by piece. He thought back to their early days, a memory flickering unbidden. Allison laughing as they danced at a friend's wedding, her eyes bright with promise. That version of her was long gone, buried under years of greed. He didn't hate her, not even now. But he wouldn't carry her choices any longer. In 3 days, the banks would finalize their findings and Allison would face the consequences she'd earned, not because he'd forced them, but because truth had a way of catching up. James stood, crossing to the window. Seattle's skyline shimmered, rain streaking the glass like tears the city couldn't hold back. He felt no urge to gloat, no need to watch her fall. His focus was forward, Portland maybe, or a small town where he could start fresh. A place where his work, his dreams, belonged to him alone. For the first time in years, the future felt open, unshadowed by deceit. Allison, meanwhile, lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She wasn't done fighting, she couldn't be. But deep down, a small, sharp voice whispered what she refused to admit. She played a game she couldn't win, and the board was about to be swept clean. The Seattle courthouse loomed under a rare April sun, its stone facade as unyielding as the truth James Holt had spent months uncovering. Inside, Allison Moore stood before a judge, her once confident posture diminished, her designer heels clicking nervously on the polished floor. The room was quiet, save for the rustle of papers as the judge reviewed the case. Financial misconduct, unauthorized transactions, debts tied to her name, each charge a thread in the web she'd spun, now unraveled for all to see. James wasn't there. He didn't need to be. His evidence, meticulously gathered, spoke louder than any courtroom speech. Weeks had passed since Allison's last stand, her frantic attempts to salvage her crumbling empire. She'd called lawyers, pleaded with banks, even tried rallying her family, but each door slammed shut. Clara, her mother, had stopped answering, her patience worn thin by Allison's excuses. Lillian, her sister, sent a single text, "You made your bed." Her friends, once eager for her invitations, vanished when the checks stopped clearing. The life she'd curated, glittering, enviable, had been a house of cards, and James's quiet resolve had blown it down. The judge's voice cut through her thoughts. "Ms. Moore, the evidence is clear. You knowingly misused your husband's financial standing, accumulating significant debts without his consent." Allison's breath hitched, but she held her chin high, clinging to the last shred of her pride. The penalties were steep: fines she couldn't pay, a frozen credit record, and a court order to repay what she'd taken. No jail time. James hadn't pushed for that, but the weight of her choices was punishment enough. She left the courtroom alone, the Seattle streets bustling around her, indifferent to the woman who'd once thought she owned them. Across the state line in Portland, James stood on the balcony of his new home, a modest house overlooking the Willamette River. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and possibility. He'd moved here days after the hotel confrontation, trading Seattle's gray bustle for a city that felt like a fresh page. His phone, once a minefield of Allison's demands, now held messages from colleagues and old friends, connections he'd neglected under her shadow. A camera sat on the table beside him, its lens glinting, a hobby he'd revived, capturing sunsets that reminded him life could be beautiful again. He'd followed the court case from afar, letting his lawyer, Paul, and advisor, Rachel, handle the details. When Paul called with the verdict, James listened in silence. "She's done, James," Paul said. "The banks have closed her accounts and the court's ruling protects you fully. You're free." Free. The words settled over him like sunlight, warm and unburdened. He thanked Paul and hung up, his gaze drifting to the river below, its current steady and unbroken. James hadn't wanted Allison's ruin, not really. He'd wanted truth, the kind that stripped away lies and left only what was real. She'd seen him as a tool, a means to an end, but he'd reclaimed himself, not with anger but with clarity. The prenup, the secured accounts, the evidence, they weren't weapons, they were boundaries drawn to protect the life he'd earned. Allison's fall was her own doing, a consequence of bets she'd made, thinking the stakes would never come due. He thought of their early years, a memory flickering like a half-forgotten film. Allison sketching travel plans on a napkin, her laughter bright with dreams they'd shared. That woman was gone, lost to choices he couldn't undo. He didn't hate her, he never had. Hate would have tethered him to her, and James was done with chains. Instead, he felt a quiet gratitude for the lessons she taught him. To trust his instincts, to value his worth, to never let someone else define his path. His new life was simple but his own. He worked remotely now, consulting on engineering projects that sparked his curiosity. Weekends were for photography, capturing the way light danced on water or leaves rustled in the Oregon breeze. He joined a local hiking group, their easy banter a reminder that connection didn't need to come with strings. Portland's quirky charm, its food trucks, its bookstores, felt like a world he could belong to, not conquer. Back in Seattle, Allison faced a different reality. The condo was on the market, her belongings packed into boxes she couldn't afford to move. She'd taken a job, a clerical role that stung her pride but paid the bills. Friends whispered about her fall from grace, their pity sharper than their silence. Yet, in her quieter moments, Allison glimpsed the truth she'd dodged for years. She'd chased an image, not a life, and lost both in the process. Change was slow, but it was hers to make, if she chose. James stepped inside, picking up his camera. He didn't dwell on Allison's fate, it wasn't his story anymore. His was here in the click of the shutter, the hum of a new project, the promise of a day unwritten. He'd fought for this, not to tear her down but to lift himself up. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose, James knew he'd found something she never could: peace. He smiled, the kind that reached his eyes, and headed out to capture the light. Life wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And that was enough.